Today we're building an all AMD micro ATX gaming PC, Ryzen 7600X, Radeon 7800XT, 32GB of DDR5 RAM. This system is designed to eat 1440p. Let's go. The motherboard of choice is the B650m PG Riptide from ASRock. I've been using ASRock lately and they've been nothing but rock steady. This board in particular has an excellent upgrade path. Years down the road, if the user wants to put in a high-end Ryzen CPU, it won't be a problem. With a 12+2+1 power phase design, this board will deliver stable power to the CPU consistently for a very long time. The 7600X CPU will be more than enough for any game we throw at it. We're keeping the cost down by choosing this over the 7800X 3D. It uses less power and it's cheaper to cool. Because of this, we're using a 240mm all-in-one over 360mm all-in-one. But honestly, you don't even need an all-in-one cooler. You could get away with a $50 air cooler. This CPU is no slouch and the value of it is just insane. Let's install the CPU, one of the most stressful parts of building a computer. It's actually very simple. Just open up the latch and open up the cover. The CPU can only go in one way, so just make sure it's lined up. Stick it in there. And then just close the cover and latch it up. When that cover pops off, it's one of the most satisfying things you'll ever experience in life. God, I need to go outside and touch some grass. The SSD is a 1TB NVMe M.2 Western Digital Black. This thing is overkill at read speeds of about 7300, but I got it on sale and it was the same price of lesser SSDs, so it was a no-brainer. Let's install the drive. Unscrew the heatsink cover. Note the film on the back of the thermal pad. The drive can go in only one way. Stick it in at about a 30-degree angle. So just push the SSD down and install the heatsink back on. But first, remember to peel off the film from the back of the thermal pad. Your motherboard may have a latching mechanism to hold the SSD down or a screw that's required to hold it down. This motherboard did not have one. So before you put the heatsink back on, make sure the SSD is secured. When tightening the screws back in, it doesn't have to be too tight, just has to be snug, just enough to hold the cover back on place. Don't use too much force, you don't want to break anything. The RAM is DDR5 6000 MHz from G.Skill. 32GB will be more than enough for a very long time. There's nothing special about this RAM. No fancy RGB, no fancy heat sinks. Simple, straight to the point, stable G.Skill RAM. I'm using 2 sticks of RAM, so I'm going to use slots 2 and 4 on my motherboard. When installing the RAM, try to apply even, uniform pressure. Line it up, push it down all as one. Try not to have one side go down first and the other side go down after. Try your best, be patient to avoid damaging the RAM sticks or the DIMM slots. I'd probably rate myself a C+ on this RAM installation. And you don't have to be paranoid when you're installing these parts. You just gotta be patient. Now on to my favorite part of every computer build, the bone structure, the body, the case. We're using the Asus AP201 micro ATX case. It's small and it doesn't waste any space. The power supply is mounted in the front, so as long as you have bottom intake fans, you'll be good for cooling. Lots of cable management room. Comes with a rear fan, I'll be replacing that. A 360mm all-in-one can go up top and it can fit any length of video card. This case is minimalistic and it's absolutely beautiful. Let's strip this thing down. This little cover that I'm taking off hides your power supply and any cable management mess you may create at the bottom of your case. Thank God for this cover because I will be making a mess. Alright, this music's getting a little dark. Let's change it up a bit here. The side panels and the top panel, front panel, all easy to take off. Just little clips holding it together, no screws. No dust filters except for on the very bottom intake. Top fan bezel can fit 3 120mm 360 radiator, or 240mm fans, or 280 radiator. Ooh, look at that shot quality. Let me know what you think of the video quality. Let me know if you think the lighting's good, angles are good. Obviously my camera stability isn't that good. I clearly have no idea how to hold a camera. I was a little bit concerned about the amount of clearance behind the motherboard tray and the rear panel. There wasn't a whole lot of space. Might get a little tight when putting on that back panel. Let's install the power supply. We do it from the front. These two little screws I'm taking out, these screws just anchor the PSU shroud to the case. Once you remove them, you'll be able to just lift the PSU shroud out. A Corsair RMX 850W PSU will power this rig. The RMX line from Corsair has been one of my favorites over the years. I always choose the RMX over the RME or just the base RM. The capacitors or Japanese components are better. Quality 650W or 700W PSU would have been fine, but an 850W allows for more headroom if the user wants to overclock it or if they want to upgrade the CPU or the GPU in the future. And where I'm from in Canada, the price increase to an 850W power supply is minimal, and there is always some kind of sale going on for 850W power supplies. The time when I bought this power supply, the 850W version was $30 cheaper than the 750W version. So take the power supply shroud that we removed from the front of the case and put it on your power supply. You can have your PSU oriented either way. I'm going to have it so that the fan is facing the front of the case, meaning that that fan is going to pull in cool air from outside the front of the case. Alright, before I put the power supply in the case and the motherboard and everything, I'm going to install the bottom intake fans first, just to avoid being cramped. At the bottom of this case you can install SSDs or hard drives if you'd like, but because there's really no front intake happening, it's a good idea to have bottom intake. I'm going to be using Arctic P12 120mm fans. I chose these fans because, well, Arctic is awesome, they're relatively affordable, and they're going to match the fans that are on my all-in-one cooler, the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3. The fans are PWM controlled, they're daisy chainable, and the RGB is also daisy chainable. And the thing I like most about these fans and Arctic is that they don't use any proprietary RGB connectors. Here's a look at the bottom intake dust filter. It's magnetized to the case. Installing the fans were simple, and running the cables at the bottom of the case were very easy. Now that the fans are in, let's install the motherboard. This case has pre-installed motherboard standoff screws for a micro ATX motherboard. If you're using an ITX motherboard, you'll have to make sure you have the right standoffs installed. Before screwing all the screws in, make sure the motherboard's lined up with all the standoffs. All the motherboard standoffs are lined up with all the holes. It's time to screw. And once again, when you're putting these screws in, they don't have to be over tightened. Just snug them up. Once I've gone around and secured all the screws in, I give it one more lap and just snug them all down, make sure none of them are loose. Although this case is quite small, there's still plenty of clearance above the motherboard for cable management and for mounting an all-in-one cooler. Alright, it's finally time to install that power supply. I'm going to connect all my cables to the power supply before I put it in the case. It's a lot easier to plug in the cables outside of the case. Alright, the power supply is installed. It's time to fasten that shroud to the case. Alright, time for my least favorite part of every computer build, running all the cables and trying to manage it. Let's run two 8-pin CPU cables. The thing I like about this case is there's a lot of spots to use zip ties on it. I always like to plug in my 8-pin CPU power cables before I install the all-in-one radiator up top. Just makes it more easier, more room to work with. Now this is just me trying to tidy up some of the cable mess as I go along. I'm just daisy chaining all the fans together, all the power cables, all the RGB. Then I'm just going to plug it into the motherboard. Time to run the 24 pin to the motherboard. Pretty straightforward. Fish it through, plug it in. There's the click you're looking for. This cable is always a little stubborn. Alright, this is the case's front panel audio connection. To be able to plug in a headset to the front of your case. I normally don't hook this up on my personal computers, but because I'm selling this, I'm going to set it up. Alright, the dreaded front panel power button and power LED. The only one you really need is just the power button, but if you want your power button to light up when the power's on, you'll need the power LED positive and ground connected as well. If you want to use your front panel USB spots, you'll have to plug those in too. This one's USB-A and this one's USB-C. First we'll plug in the USB-C one. And then the USB-A one into the motherboard. Okay, now that a big chunk of the cables are managed, let's go ahead and install the all-in-one cooler. I went with the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3, the 240mm cooler. Because the Ryzen 7600X isn't too over the top when it comes to cooling, I went with the 240mm version of this cooler from Arctic. This cooler's getting great reviews, and the little VRM fan is a nice touch. It'll help keep all the power stuff on your motherboard cool and even help cool the RAM. Alright, this is me just installing the mounting hardware for the Ryzen CPU. Let's add a blob of Arctic thermal paste that comes with it. Because the hotspot on this generation's Ryzen CPUs is below the center of the CPU, the mounting hardware for the AM5 kit that Arctic provides actually offsets the cold plate a little bit below the center of the CPU. It's little things like that that I appreciate when I'm buying my components. Once it was all installed, I was able to run power to the fan for the VRM cooler, power to the pump, and of course power to the fans on the radiator. The video card is the Sapphire 7800 XT. With 16 gigabytes of VRAM, this card will eat up 1440p. Although the 4070 Super is marginally better, it's pricier. And is that price increase of about $100 worth it? Well, I can't say for you, but for me it's not. Okay, everything's installed, everything's plugged in. Let's turn the power supply switch on. That's the one thing that's kind of annoying about this case, is to get at the power switch, you got to take the top panel off. I just want to take a moment to talk about the clearance. If you're using a 240 or a 360 radiator or 120 millimeter size fans, there's going to be a lot of room to work with in this case. Lots of clearance in between the motherboard and the top fans and the radiator and everything. As for the front mounted power supply, you can actually move the power supply up higher. There's a couple of notches there. You can actually move the power supply up to accommodate very long graphics cards. Let's go ahead and put that top panel on, put the front panel on. And of course the rear panel on. I thought there was going to be an issue with putting this rear panel on because I didn't think there was enough clearance for all the cables, but there was a lot of clearance and the panel went on easily. I really enjoyed building in this case, and I definitely do recommend it. There's lots of airflow, lots of room for all your components, and this case kind of reminds me of cases from back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. Just something about it. In a saturated case market where fish tank cases are dominating, this is a nice change.